Why do we know so little about women's health? Only 1 in 3 clinical trial participants are women. For too long, the data has been outdated. The research based on men and women left unseen, misunderstood, and misdiagnosed.
And the recommended intake for protein for women has been based on sedentary older men and really poor nitrogen studies.
So this episode is for every woman who's ever felt lost in her own body. We've brought together the most powerful insights from some of the leading guests to create a women's health masterclass, covering everything from hormones and stress to gut health, libido, and longevity.
When we spend so much time zone 2ing, then those crossover fibers are becoming more oxidative, and we're losing our body's ability to produce lactate, which is a risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's.
Which is the leading cause of death in the UK.
If you're having bowel symptoms like constipation, if you're having back pain, if you're having pain with sex, sometimes this can be a sign of an abnormal pelvic floor.
Creatine.
It's the best thing out there.
I knew you'd say that.
Men and women's brains are very different. Men have, on the average, a little bigger brains.
I saw it was 11% larger, but I don't know if that's right or wrong.
But that has never translated to function at all.
So many women still feel unseen, and this episode helps to bring us together to make sense of what's really going on and to give you the tools and confidence to understand your own body in a whole new way. Because if we want to live well and be well as a woman, we need better answers and a very different conversation.
If you just follow your data, if you just get good data reliably, you'll be guided internally more than these bucket rules that can apply, especially when there isn't that much science on women's health specifically out there.
This is the Women's Health Masterclass I wish I had in my 20s. Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. Let's redefine it, Stacey. Let's redefine a woman's. Can you not do this? Can you not build the woman's plate, the eat well plate for a woman?
Yeah, because I don't think people realize that regardless of what country you're in, the recommended daily allowance or recommended daily intake is based on the minimal amount to avoid malnutrition. And the recommended intake for protein for women has been based on sedentary older men and really poor nitrogen studies. And they use sedentary. No, I mean, it's funny, right? Because they're like, well, women don't want to go through nitrogen studies. They're delicate flowers. So we'll look at someone who has similar body composition. So we'll look at these older men who have higher body fat than younger men. How much do they need? Oh, well, that's what it's going to be for women. And that's how we've gotten these recommended daily intakes, right? And no one's gone back to look at it. But recently, they're starting to really look at protein and how important it is because we're starting to see, I laugh at the irony of the fact that the whole world is malnourished. We have malnourishment from lack of food, and we have malnourishment of too many processed calories and shit food.
So I always say overnourished and undernourished at the same time.
Yeah.
We're overweight, but we're nutrient deprived.
Exactly. That's it, right? And I find it interesting being an expat when I'm in New Zealand and I see the food that's available here versus I go to the States and I'll go to a grocery store in the States and there's rows and rows and rows of stuff they say is food, but I couldn't eat any of it because it's so ultra processed and just marketed with a whole bunch of stuff. And if you're not aware of that, you don't know how to choose. So I think that if we're going to look at a plate, like what is a woman's ideal plate, there needs to be the caveat of if it has big marketing that says high protein and it's a Pop-Tart, move away, right? This is what ultra processed food means. But generally, I mean, it's the old fashioned 30-40-40 rule where 30% is protein, 30% is good fats, and 40% is complex carbs. And then you modify based on like who you are with regards to where you are in your lifespan, what kind of training you're doing, if you're traveling or not under high stress, because if you're under a lot of high stress, you need to boost some carbs up just to keep your gut microbiome happy and to be able to have immune cells that are happy. So yeah, there's the little nuances within that, but basically that old fashioned 40-30-30 is really good. And then it's the distribution throughout the day that people need to nail, where we're looking at, having food when you wake up and having regular protein throughout the day and really good complex carbs. And we can go to the 80-20 rule, where 80% you're doing that and 20% is life. But people put so many restrictive rules around what they're eating that they forget what it means to be nourished from a soul perspective, not just some physicality.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's something that I dial in on my work a lot, especially if you also look at, work from Stanford with Aaliyah Crum, when she talks about, you could have the same meal, but your mindset, if you're told that you've got the FTO gene, which is the one that you're more predetermined to be obesogenic, which actually is a very small chance, by the way, that if you do have that, but never again, that's the information how they delivered it in the study, that if you have that same meal and you're either told that you have that gene or you don't, you will metabolize that meal totally differently. And I think that for me was really striking in the work that I've gone on to do with nutrition, that yes, food is so fundamental, but it's not always just food is first, because the mindset plays a massive factor in how we're thinking about this, how we're choosing it, how we actually accept ourselves. Are we making the right decisions for us or because we're told that we should? And we're being misdirected in our health goals. And that, I believe that's like one of the most underestimated conversations, especially for women, because we've spoken so much about that cultural influence of the pressures that we have. And many women might say, well, maybe I don't feel that, but I think subconsciously we all have that messaging because that's what we've grown up in.
Yeah, it is. And the push to take care of everyone else first instead of us, right? And I'm always telling, the mother, even if you're not a mother, you're still thinking about work or your partner or your parents. And I'm always like, you got to take at least 10 minutes first thing in the morning just to center yourself and say, what am I doing for myself today? And make it a permanent note in your calendar so it can't be moved.
Talking about this and something that I really want to make sure we're on the context of protein, because it seems like this is now going to be like the driving factor of this conversation, is you mentioned the other diets there, like low fat, low carb. I'm still really aware that if people are saying, okay, I'll have lots of protein, I'm going to have a high protein diet. There's a 2-question part that I want to ask. One, can you have too much protein in one sitting? Because that's a big kind of conversation that's online. Some people argue you can, some people argue you can't. And secondly, how important it is to make sure that you're not having a super low carb diet if you're having a very high protein diet. And I'm thinking about people building their plates with maybe a fillet of salmon and it's hard. I say vegetables, but I talk about that. I know they're carbohydrates, but it's a very low carbohydrate diet and how that would be formed if you didn't have some brown rice or some brown pasta or whatever on the side. So in that context, it's a 2-pronged approach. Can you have too much protein? And also, what about a high protein, low carb diet for women?
Yeah. So the study that came out, I think it was 3 months ago, that was looking at the 100-gram dose of protein and how long that took to digest. And over 24 hours, it was still improving muscle protein synthesis and stuff. It was done in men. It hasn't been done in women. So we don't know definitively. And we know that there is a difference in gastric emptying rate for women versus men, the way that women respond to protein intake versus men. So when I hear that, I'm like, it's a caveat. Yes, we know there's no upper limit for men, but it was a very small N. And we don't know what the training status was. We have to look at the age. There's so many different factors that come into digestion that I'm still holding on to. Look, we know that you need regular protein throughout the day at around 30 or 40 grams at each meal, maybe 15 to 20 grams each snack. And if you're exercising, as a recreational athlete, on the days that you're not training, 3 meals and 1 snack is probably enough. And if you, on the days that you are training, you want to bookend your training with some food before and after. And that's the simplest way that I can get people to visualize what they're supposed to be doing with regards to how they space protein out. When we're looking at low carb, high protein, this is a big problem because now women are focusing more and more on that palm size or palm size and a half. And they're forgetting that you don't have to have that that size of salmon or meat on the plate, you can have something that's like a bootable, right? And you're having some sweet potato, you're having some tempeh, you're having some beans, you're having a slice of beef in there, you're having lots of dark green leafy veggies and some fruit. So you're having lots of complex carbs, and then you're also having your protein, because there's so many different sources of protein. And I'm also, don't forget the quinoa, don't forget the amaranth or the buckwheat. Like, all of those can be accents. I try to steer people more towards the visualization of like a Japanese plate, where the major things of Western society are actually the accents. And the things that are accents for the Western society, like our veggies and things, is the main course. So it's like, okay, let's bring them together. So you know that when you are having protein, I don't mean a big slab of fish. I mean, fish is in there and it's part of the accent with all the other good things that contribute to protein. And when I start saying that, and people are like, oh, I get it now. I get it. So I can have a salad at lunch that is some fruit and some spinach and some beans, and maybe I'm going to have a little bit of roasted chicken. So I'm getting all these great things and I feel satiated, but I don't feel overly full from too much, dead protein hanging out my stomach. And then we have the people who are like, what about the carnivorous diet? I'm like, that completely wrecks your gut microbiome. Like, I don't understand why people would just want to do something that's so contraindicative to having a healthy gut.
Wow, I love that. This is going to probably go a bit AWOL on YouTube with that comment, but I agree. We had Dr. Will Bolsowicz, who comes on talking a lot about obviously fiber fueled and the importance of fiber for the gut. And I think that is really important, right? I think looking at now, I'm already building out, I want to make sure that I'm keeping track of this, a perfect woman's day, which isn't always perfect. I'm going to reframe that. How a day should be looking for a woman who has no health conditions, going to put it out there, isn't excessively an athlete, not an excessive endurance training, but basically wakes up, has some water, I imagine, has either 15 grams of protein for breakfast, minimum if they're not hungry, but if not, they have a very good 30-30-30 rule, 30 grams, 30% fat, 30% carbohydrate, 30% protein. And that's how we want to be building our plate. And we want to be having at least 1.6 grams of protein for 1 kilo of body weight. And we want to be spacing that constantly throughout the day. And we want to making sure that it's whole grains. We want to make sure that it's a variety of foods, a variety of proteins. It's not just a slab of one. We're really mixing it in for the diversity. That's how I'm garnering women's health on a plate or as a lifestyle right now. Am I right?
Perfect. You are. And then on the subsides, we have to have room for like whiskey and dark chocolate and coffee and wine as the occasional accents that makes life so fun.
That's the thing. Okay, so we're taking out any extreme and we're going real back to balance and basics here, and actually going back to our needs. It sounds like I'm thinking about training now. So there is a huge buzz online around zone 2 training. And it's kind of supposedly holds the key to endurance and long-term health. And again, the buzzword of longevity that, we all want to have. First of all, like, why should women care about this? And is it important? Does it like fit into a woman's workout routine? Is this what we should be thinking about as the golden child of endurance training? And what is it? Because I think that some people might not know, but I think generally it's blown up online as like this golden child of women's training in general.
And I get so frustrated with it because, again, when we're looking at the data of zone 2, right, and we see who have pushed it, it's the two primary dudes that biohack and put the words out about it. Very popular podcasts. And
can we say who they are?
Sure, Huberman and Attia, right? And we know that they put that out there, very bro science. And as an exercise physiologist, I understand the zones and I understand the idea of, we have to have base miles. But again, it's coming from that male data. So if we pull it back and look from a physiological perspective of why people are pushing zone 2, is to improve metabolic flexibility and the body's ability to uptake and utilize free fatty acids. When we look at women who come from XX, and I'll apologize in advance because we don't have any data outside of the binary of XX versus XY. When a baby is born XX, they're already born with more oxidative fibers. So that means endurance fibers. And we're also born with more mitochondrial proteins within there to be metabolically flexible. Then, as we go through puberty and we get the exposure of estrogen and progesterone, we have more influence on being metabolically flexible because these two hormones change the way that our body responds to carbohydrate across the menstrual cycle. Then, as we start getting into perimenopause, we might lose those hormones, but we still have the undercurrent of mitochondrial density and better mitochondrial respiration than men. What we need to do as women is look and say, hey, wait, we don't have a lot of glycolytic or type 2 fibers, those lactate producing fibers. And we know that lactate production is really, really important for brain health. And if we don't use them, we spend so much time zone 2ing, then those crossover fibers are becoming more oxidative and we're losing our body's ability to produce lactate, which is a risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's.
Which is the leading cause of death in the UK. I just want to put that out there because a lot of women in their 30s and 40s might not even be thinking that this is a thing. It's the leading cause of death in the UK.
And it is a significant sex difference. And I mean, there's lots of reasons from sociocultural and mind stimulation to the population that's dying now. But a physiological basis underneath is the plaque development. And that comes from misstep of the glial cells and the metabolism of the brain. We start to become more hypometabolic, meaning that our brain doesn't use blood glucose very well. So it relies more and more on lactate. And because women don't have a lot of those glycolytic type 2 fibers, we're having more and more difficulty producing that lactate. So if we bring it back down to zone 2, we don't need to do the zone 2 workouts that are being pushed so much. If you have all the time in the world, right, and you're not working and you can train as much as you want, sure, put in a lot of zone 2 because it is low intensity. It gets you out in nature and it's great. But if you're looking to maximize health and longevity, we need to take a step back from that zone 2 training as women and focus more on how are we developing these glycolytic fibers? How are we pushing true lactate production as the mainstay with our resistance training, which is also super important for brain health, as well as maintaining lean mass, right? So those become the mainstay. And then we look at zone 2 as our soul food. Like we want to go out with friends on a hike or a long ride, or we're training for a half marathon, right? Because we have this goal. We still put a precedence on that higher intensity, but we have time and a place for zone 2 because it does fit in, but it does not mean that that's what you have to do day in and day out for an hour and a half because it's so time intensive and it's not as metabolically stimulating in a positive manner for women because being that cis woman, that XX, you already have all of the fat burning capacity and the metabolic flexibility that zone 2 is trying to push. So when I say you train for zone 2, men need to do it to become more like women.
God, that's the best line I've ever heard. Men need to do it to become more like women. That's going to be the title of this podcast.
Okay.
For any women that maybe are like, oh, I'm not quite sure what zone 2 is. Can you give the definition of what zone 2 training actually is and where it, like the parameters of
it? So zone 2 is typically said to be the pace that you go that you can maintain a conversation where you're still a little bit breathless. You might be breaking a sweat, but it's pretty low intensity. If you're looking on a rating of perceived exertion scale of 0 being like you're just waking up dead on the couch and 10 being maximum full gas sprint, zone 2 sits about a 4. So you're not going too easy, but you're not going moderate to hard either. And so people are like, okay, I'm going to use a heart rate monitor. So I make sure that I'm going really super easy so they can stay in zone 2 because a lot of people don't realize how easy it actually is.
I'm going to give you 2 different subgroups. I'm going to give you a woman kind of 30s to early 40s, and then going more into perimenopause, into kind of the mid 40s to the mid 50s. How should these 2 types of women be looking at their training, whether it's zone 2 or not? What is their kind of, a bit like the plate that we made, how should women be approaching their training in these 2 different sets?
Yeah, so across the board, all women should be doing strength training. And I don't mean our little pink dumbbells and our 3 kilo weights.
They are
you know what
gone.
I mean. Right.
They're gone.
So
they're gone.
Yeah. It's when you're in your reproductive years or your younger years, you can play around a little bit more about like your 10 to 12, your hypertrophy stuff. But as we get into peri and postmenopause, we really need to look at the strength development and do neural adaptations. So we know that when we're doing the power-based stuff that's more neurally adaptive, we are also going to build lean mass and keep the impetus for building lean mass. But if we're doing more hypertrophy type training, we don't get strength. We just get a little bit of lean mass build. So when we're looking at lifting weights, we want to be strong. When we're looking at intensity and what we're doing, it's paramount that women who are perimenopausal into postmenopause do 2 to 3 high intensity interval sessions a week. So this is, either sprint interval, that's your 30 seconds or less, as hard as you can, or it's true high intensity work, not a F45 Orange Theory type class, but you're doing your every minute on the minute for 3 minutes and then having a full minute off. And then you repeat that 2 or 3 times, done and dusted in 30 minutes. And then for women who are in their reproductive years, so their 30s and early 40s, you can get away with a lot of stuff and play around a lot, right? So yes, we want some high intensity. We want polarization because we want that lactate development with the eye to, I'm getting older, I'm going to have to train my body this way anyway. But there still is room if you want to go and do ultra endurance stuff, right? You can still benefit from that. The caveat of that is, we don't want you to keep training those oxidative fibers so much that you're just going to keep getting slower and slower and slower. We have to have an eye of peppering it with that high intensity work too. So if we're looking at our 30s to early 40s, have a play, don't overtrain, eat well. You have a little bit of room to do a lot of kind of fun stuff. And then we have to become a little bit more dialed to what is the bread and butter for longevity when we get into our mid 40s onwards. The bread and butter, again, is that heavy resistance training peppered with some high intensity work. And then if you're someone who's like, I'm training for an ultra run, how do I do this? Well, yeah, we look at what you're doing when your event is. We can put in time on the feet. But again, we really want to maintain that high intensity quality work, and then we see where we fit in the longer stuff.
So I am on the first day of my period today.
Yes.
And I feel like utter shit.
Yes.
I have so much brain fog. So if I'm not sharp in this interview, there's an exact reason why. And we were meant to do this interview last Friday. And actually, you actually weren't very well, which might be a surprise to people. Like, you were sick. How are you sick on this blueprint protocol?
Yeah.
So many questions to dive into. But we've done it a week later, just before I fly back to London. And obviously, I wouldn't normally schedule something on the first day of my period for very obvious reasons. I've woken up, I feel bloated, I'm in a lot of pain, I feel nauseous.
Yeah.
So for me this morning, I was like, I just want to grab something that's quick release of sugar. I want to have loads of coffee. People might be listening to this thinking that I always eat a healthy diet. Like, I try to have the 80-20 rule, but I go with my body, how it intuitively feels. And right now I needed something to get me through this morning.
Yes.
How do you deal with a intense protocol around your cycle?
Yeah.
Do you stick to this like perfect protocol every day? Like, because women's hormones flux and they really impact how you feel.
100%. Yeah. No, I'm not perfect. And the other thing is like Brian is doing something extreme. Like he's doing something for himself that's like extreme. Like the expectation is not for other people to do this. So I don't want anyone to witness what he's doing and be like feeling like they aren't, like everyone should just be doing their best in the moment and just treat themselves with grace. So I would be with you in that moment of like waking up and feeling like shit and you just want something easy. Totally get it. So yeah, and then on top of that, I think just knowing where a lot of people don't even know where they're at in the cycle and like what that impact has on their health. And so then if you know that, at least like when you have these cravings, you can actually relate to it in a way where you can understand. So for example, your first day period, I ovulated last night. So we're in the exact opposite side of the cycle spectrum.
You are going to sound so much smarter than me today.
I do feel particularly good. My HIV is up. I had great sleep. I always sleep horribly on my first day of my period. Yeah. So yeah, it is real, and we should treat ourselves with grace and kindness in these moments of like acknowledging it's not something you can just like control. It's sometimes it's out of your control.
So let's go to last month when you were menstruating, when you had your first bleed day. What was your day like?
So the way to think about cycle, or the way I think about it anyway, and you can go again, rabbit hole information, but the top level is, so you have your follicular phase, which is you already know this, but like for everyone at home, the first day of your period really starts that phase. So your period's in 2 phases, your follicular and your luteal. I like to think of follicular like, fuck yeah, like follicular, let's fucking go. And so that whole period, that first half, starting from the first day of your period until ovulation, you should really push yourself. You have more insulin resistance, so you can handle carbs better. You can really like push yourself and like go a little bit harder. Once you start ovulating and then through to the end of your cycle, like that's recovery time, rest time. And so right around this time where you're transitioning between the two, like I treat myself with so much care. And so if I don't feel like exercising that day, I don't push myself. Like also physically, like you're just, I don't know about you, but like I'm just uncomfortable. Like I'm cramping. I don't really feel comfortable pushing myself while I'm bleeding. And so oftentimes I'll just have like a rest day on those days.
Okay. And do you change your diet? Like, do you have these moments of urges, of cravings, where you're like, I actually really want to have something? Because when I spoke to Talmadge on here, or Brian, they're like, no, nothing is worth the compromise. And I feel like you are actually, I will grab some chocolate if needed. Or are you not like that?
I play within the sandbox.
Okay.
So like I might have some more berries, which I know it's depressing, but it's taken me a long time to even get there. Like before I would have the chocolate or whatever else. But now I do know that ultimately that's going to have a negative impact. It depends on what time it is. Like if I'm craving chocolate and it's in the morning, then I'll just have like an extra scoop of cocoa, which will have more heavy metals for my day than I should be having. But like that's my sandbox playing. But like I won't go for the chocolate that has like added sugars, for example. But again, like took me many years to get there. And I'm sure I'm going to also fall back off that bandwagon at some point, come back on. Like I'm not perfect by any means. So
So I guess like for you, it's keeping within the wheelhouse of whole foods.
Yes, exactly.
But you aren't tracking your macros so intensely that you will reduce your calorie intake.
Correct.
To get the data. Because I think I heard you, like, because you haven't done that many interviews.
Yes.
So I was trying to like grasp what I could from,
Yeah.
because I haven't met you before, right? So I'm trying to like understand, you know, what's the intensity of Kate's protocol, and obviously I watched Don't Die. And I felt that from one of the interviews that you did, you know, you were so aware that you were given this chance to have this experiment, and you wanted to not let Brian down, the team down, the world down, because you're the first woman. I mean, it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Right? And I watched that and I just thought, so my science and what I'm really obsessed with is how we talk to ourselves. So
what did you observe?
So I observed, I'll tell
Please
you what I observed.
tell me.
So the intersection of what I observed was, okay, you're having this like perfect diet, quote, if you're watching this on YouTube, like my quotation marks are coming up. No one can argue with the whole foods diet, okay? I mean, I'm not sure on what your fasting restrictions are, and that's again something that maybe we could talk about, especially with the cycle. Like Stacey Sims will say, if you're exercising, Dr. Stacey Sims, who's an incredible nutritionist and physiologist, will say, make sure you have breakfast in the morning and then train. So there's a lot of like controversy around fasting and training and women's health. But you can have this perfect lifestyle. But then if you are beating yourself up every day, the self-critical lens, which is where I was when I was modeling, I had the perfect diet.
100%.
Right, and I ended up in hospital.
Yeah.
Because the self-criticism of not being perfect.
It overrides everything else.
Overrides everything. My cortisol, my stress hormones. And yeah, we do need cortisol to rise. We need it to get shit done in very small quantities. But if we're living a life of like the stress, it dampens our immune system and all of these things.
Yeah.
So I was kind of observing that. And this was about a year ago you had this interview. And I was thinking, you know, will she actually be affecting the data? Because she's got a self-critical lens of wanting to make sure that she's doing the right job.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
which is literally what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this.
Like that 30-day period where I first started and I jumped 2 feet in and like changed my lifestyle overnight. Like cold turkey, completely different human. I ended up, so I was doing 16 minutes of zone 5 training every single day during that time, which is just a lot for someone who didn't exercise before that.
And tell people quick, because people have heard of zone 2, but just explain what zone 5 is for the extremity of what you're actually saying.
So essentially it's as high as you can get your heart rate up. Pretty much, you can summarize that. And so like everyone, like as you age, your heart rate, your max heart rate decreases. For me, my zone 5 was anything above 173 beats per minute. So it's just like, your heart is going.
16 minutes. God, did you not throw up?
I know. It was like so much. There's so much. And I always want to do the best job I can. And so I pushed myself too much during that time period where I wasn't listening to the data. I was just pushing for the sake of pushing, like similar to probably how you were going about your modeling journey. And so, yeah, it really takes stepping back and looking at the data and that's the same thing. Even all the fasting around women's health and all these contrarian opinions around women's health in general, if you just follow your data, if you just get good data reliably, you'll be guided internally more than these bucket rules that can apply, especially when there isn't that much science on women's health specifically out there. And so like I always say, like, just go back to the data.
So emotionally, what happened after those 30 days? Like, did you crash? Did you have a breakdown? Like, what happened?
So we answered the question, does Brian's protocol work in someone else of different gender, different age? The answer is yes. Like, it does. Broccoli, exercise, sleep, it's fantastic for everyone. It's good to go. After that point, it was like, okay, so now if I'm going to keep doing this, I need to find the right balance for myself psychologically, lifestyle-wise, all that kind of stuff. So I've kind of been going through this journey of finding my balance. And I think I'm someone, like I said, I'm a student of the mind. Like, I love understanding people. And so I'm very realistic in knowing that we are individuals that are so impacted by the way we think, the emotions we feel. So I always knew going into this that I was never going to be able to be perfect forever.
But you can't, because that's not being human.
Yeah, that's
right?
My experience. Totally.
I'm
a chaotic.
Yeah.
I'm a chaotic. I'm a creative. I want to stay up late. I want to do bad things. I want to throw a grenade into my life sometimes and like just see what happens. Like that's totally me. So that's why I mean about the sandbox. And I think, I don't know about you, but this is happiness as well to me, that you operate within the constraints of your environment. And you will find happiness and sadness and highs and lows and crashes, no matter what your environment is. When you're placed into it, like you just go in the sandbox and you find the edges. And so I knew that the goal here was not to be perfect. I'm always going to have highs and lows. I'm always going to feel like I'm screwing up and being successful. But the goal is to create a sandbox environment where generally it's 10 times healthier than I was before. And that's where I'm at now after a year and a half of doing this.
I'm interested to see like what your take on this is. So there was a study done last year.
Okay.
And it was around tampons.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to try and find it because I want to know, how do you use tampons first of all, or do you use like a cup? Because there's a lot of conversation around the heavy metals. And I'll explain this why. There was a Berkeley study last year, evaluated 16 metals and 30 tampons from 14 different brands. The metal concentrations varied by where the tampons were purchased. So whether it's here in the US or the EU or in the UK where I'm from, they looked at organic versus non-organic and store versus name brand. And they found that metals are present in all types of tampons. No category had consistently lower concentrations of all or most metals. Lead concentrations were higher in non-organic tampons, but arsenic was higher in organic tampons. So this is not for me to demonize tampons. I use tampons, to put it out there very clearly. But when I'm thinking about like your protocol and all the data, and I use the word obsessiveness because you are, right? You're like hyper nailing down on like what's affecting the body. Something I could never ask Brian or Talmage was this question.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your women's health and menstruation, how do you look at this area? And how do you approach it?
I want to preface this by saying that this is like totally personal opinion. So I don't know the research on cups, for example, and the difference between that and pads and all these other options. But personally, I try to avoid tampons at all costs. I just am skeptical that as we continue to get more data, we will just find more and more scary information. But again, I don't know. But yeah, I do try and avoid tampons at all costs.
So what do you use instead?
So I oscillate between just pads. I also do occasionally use tampons, like in moments where I'm like, I just want the extra security of like I'm maybe going to be out and about and I'm exercising, or I'm going to be in a situation where like I want more comfort that I'm not going to like bleed everywhere.
Yeah.
Then I'll use a tampon. And I kind of always feel a little uncomfortable about it. And then, occasionally use cups as well.
I think it's an important conversation to have.
I
One,
agree.
just for women. And I do not want to make this sound like I am demonizing tampons because I use them. It's just one of those things that I was wondering if you were tracking, if you had seen any data on it, or if there's something that was in conversation with the doctors, because I know that you have lots of doctors that are advising you and what their conversation's like. Because until this study had come out, and it was a small study, right? It's a pilot study.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, like, we have to take everything with a pinch of salt. But when I read this, I thought, actually, that's something that I've probably not been that aware of. And I'm someone who's always suffered with heavy periods. So,
That's hard.
for me, it's, sometimes
Necessity.
thinking about a cup, I'm like, oh, is that gonna be as absorbent as a tampon? And for me, I'm not recording my health data. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not thinking about it maybe as much as you, but it's something that I don't think women talk about very much.
I agree.
And I've only had these conversations kind of off mic with friends who have
privately.
told me, who have told me to use a cup.
Yeah.
And actually how much better they are for you.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're made of plastic.
Exactly.
So I don't know if there's a micro. So God, you can really spin
Exactly.
yourself. I'm spinning myself out in this conversation.
Yes.
There's always going to be a trade-off.
Yes.
But I guess for you and the data you feel for your own opinion, anecdotally, that pads are.
Exactly. This is where we just need more data and more science. And all we can do in these moments is speculate. So I agree.
The moon cup is good for environment.
Right.
Then you're not using any waste.
Right, exactly. I tend to, even though pads are very uncomfortable, I tend to try to use pads as much as possible just because it's the least invasive to my body. And in the realm of not having data, I find that it's like the most soothing in the sense of like, I'm not putting something, and especially I try and get like organic ones that don't have any kind of scents associated with them and all the like nasty synthetic stuff that you can get in pads as well. But I just find that's like the most, like, if you're going to not have data, you might as well have something that's not in your body. But then besides that, I use like a flex disc.
What's that?
It's like it's a cup essentially. Yeah. But it's disposable.
Okay.
So it's probably also bad for the environment. Probably has microplastics. Probably has it's just like an endless rabbit hole. And I know it's scary and it sucks that we don't have good enough data on it.
We're never really taught about the pelvic floor. So how do we know if we have this healthy pelvic floor, and what does a healthy pelvic floor look like? I'm saying that with this because I feel like it could be quite different for many people.
It's hard to know. Honestly, the average person will not know if their pelvic floor is unhealthy. But you will know if you start noticing that you're having urinary incontinence, urinary frequency, you're having urinary urgency, or you're having difficulty emptying your bladder. It could be a sign of an abnormal pelvic floor. If you're having bowel symptoms like constipation, if you're having back pain, if you're having pain with sex, if you're having pain for men in their testicles, sometimes this can be a sign of an abnormal pelvic floor. And it needs to be evaluated and examined to assess if there's an abnormality in the pelvic floor or not.
Just thinking about this, I'm going to get a little bit more into the pelvic floor, but I'm just also wanting to talk a little bit about sex in this conversation as well. And I'm just going to put it in there early. So I just thought I'll pop that in there now. So people who are listening to this aren't going to be kind of blown away in 20 minutes when we start really kind of getting into the importance of sex and orgasms and masturbation. Let's just throw those words out there now because it is really important. And just thinking about the pelvic floor, how important is this for a good sex life?
I think people overestimate like having a strong pelvic floor for better orgasms. I mean, yes, if you have a strong, healthy pelvic floor, some people will perceive stronger orgasms, better sex life. But a lot of people don't know exactly how to strengthen their pelvic floor. So people hear the term Kegel and they try doing all these things. They don't actually activate the right muscles. They might be straining their abdomen. They might be straining their gluteal muscles, but they're not actually strengthening their pelvic floor, or they're over strengthening. So just like going to the gym, if you overtrain a muscle, it's going to get sore and hurt. And sometimes it can create tension in those muscles. And when you create like prolonged tension in the pelvic floor, that's what creates all these issues. And so it's sort of like, do you need to do it? You can, absolutely, but it needs to be done sort of in a thoughtful way to make sure that you're actually activating the correct muscles and you're getting the benefit that you so desire. Doing more is not always better, just like going to the gym and doing a ton of reps. If you're doing poor form or you're not doing it correctly, is not going to help you.
It's so interesting, isn't it? So much about health just in general is about balance. incontinence. But it's one of those things, and I know that obviously you mentioned about like what does a normal pelvic floor look like, or a healthier one. I suffer with a bad back, so I know when I've got a bad back, I actually need to be doing more yoga or more stretching or more lengthening. But I'm now trying to think about my own pelvic floor, and I'm trying to think, do I know if it's too tight or do I know if it's too weak? And I feel like I'd be more likely to know if it's more weak. And women hear about this a lot more, I think, due to incontinence. But how can I assess my own pelvic floor and to figure out where that is?
So it's a bit easier for women because you can feel the pelvic floor muscles through the vagina. So generally, not everyone feels comfortable, but you can palpate your own muscles in the vagina. You should be able to put either you can get like wands that can sense your pelvic floor, or you can use your own finger, right? And you can feel, you want it also to be coordinated, right? So if you squeeze, you should feel the muscles squeeze on your finger. And if you relax, you should feel the muscles relax. And say you cough, you should feel the muscles coordinate, like, relax and tighten quickly during that cough. So it should be sort of coordinated. When you're bearing down or when you're coughing, you should have kind of normal coordination, and your muscles should squeeze and relax as you are trying to do so. And so sometimes that takes a little bit of effort, and often having a pelvic floor physical therapist, if you are worried about these symptoms, can help to assess your pelvic floor, or seeing a urologist, or for women, a gynecologist, or seeing a urologist for women too. We're experts in both, but in general, that can be helpful.
Let's just think about how we can loosen our pelvic floor before we get onto the tightening, because I think I hear a lot about how we can kind of like look at strengthening our pelvic floor, but it's also quite new to me to think about actually how, if it is tight, how can we loosen it and what can we do? And first of all, the thought that comes to mind is stress, working on our stress. But what other techniques would be really important here?
So generally, you want to do exercises that will lengthen, just like you said, we do exercises like yoga to lengthen the muscles. You want to work on those type of exercises. So we're so lucky that we have the internet now. I mean, I was thinking back to like when we were younger, there was no internet. Like you couldn't look these things up. But now if you look up exercises for down training or relaxation of the pelvic floor online, there's so many wonderful pelvic floor physical therapists who have put exercises online that can help you. But the best way is actually having a pelvic floor therapist with you working on it, because they are trained in this. And I don't know what the situation is in the UK, but here we have, a reasonable number. You have to find people who are dedicated to pelvic floor and that's their kind of area of expertise. But there are a good number of pelvic floor therapists, and they are going to be like your personal trainer for your pelvic floor, because it's really hard for us to understand, like to really work on those muscles. Usually if you have a normal functioning pelvic floor, you never think about it, right? You never like ever have to do anything. So it's a very different skill set than just going to the gym and lifting weights, right?
It's just one of those things that we tend to not really think about. The only time until, I really looked into research for this episode was just thinking about hearing in pelvic floor and Pilates. I mean, that's probably the only time, or from when they've had babies and kind of afterwards, and the importance of the pelvic floor. But we don't really think about kind of, connecting to that as something that's really important, not just for, our health, but also for our sex lives and, our even just mentioning blood flow. But looking at strength, so quite a few questions came in around how can I strengthen my pelvic floor? Because you've obviously mentioned Kegels. Who is Mr. Kegel? And talk about the terminology around Kegels and exercises here.
So Kegel's an American gynecologist who coined the term of doing pelvic floor strengthening exercises, and it became very popularized as a way to strengthen the pelvic floor, which is essentially tightening those muscles, right? So how you do it, and there's different ways, but we describe it as, when you're urinating and you try to stop the stream of urine, you're doing a Kegel essentially. So that's how you learn what those muscles are. And then you can do those exercises on your own. We also describe it as kind of pulling up and in, but it's sort of difficult and sometimes takes some training, but that's not the only way that you can help your pelvic floor, right? Strengthening your core is sort of integral to your pelvic floor. So strengthening your core can be beneficial and not as much crunches, but more like doing planks or other ways. And the core is not just the abdominal muscles, right? It's also the back. And so kind of strengthening the core as a whole can be helpful. And then, there's, like I said, posture, balance, all those things play a role in it. So making sure those things are corrected before you strengthen your pelvic floor, because otherwise you're sort of correcting asymmetric pelvic floor, which may or may not be helpful and may be harmful. So that's why I think ultimately, if you have the luxury of time and accessibility to a pelvic floor physical therapist, it's going to be super helpful.
I really want to talk about supplementation.
Yeah.
There's so much we didn't get to talk about last time. I've pulled out a few that I think women, whether you're menopausal, perimenopausal, you can say whether it's more specific in which life phase. But these are the ones that I think women want to know a lot about. So collagen.
Yeah.
Okay, so as from a scientific point of view, I think about collagen not from a beauty standpoint.
Yeah.
Right. So but I think this is what most women want to know. Does it also have those benefits? But I always look at it from a bone standpoint.
Yeah.
So talk to me about supplementation. Should women be supplementing with collagen? And if so, why? What are the reasons?
That one's a hard one.
I have to chuck in a few hard ones.
I know, you have to.
I've got to.
Okay, so if we look at collagen, there's things that aren't well known. We have collagen peptides. We also have native collagen, which is the whole molecule of the collagen. If we look at collagen peptides, because they're small bits of collagen, they're actually absorbed and can go to target tissue. And we see that there is evidence that if you're using type 2 collagen, which is joint specific, and you're using peptides, they can actually go and they can help attenuate the decline of some of the cartilage. So it does help with joints. If we look at using native collagen with that, native collagen or the whole collagen molecule is not absorbed, but it causes an immune response. So then you are getting an immune response that's telling the body not to attack the cartilage. So there is evidence to show that if you're looking at type 2 collagen specific to joints, that it can help with reducing the degradation of cartilage. It's not going to stop it, but it's going to help reduce it.
Okay.
When we look at the type 3s and 1s, which is the most common that's out there, that doesn't do anything for joints. That's your hair, that's your nails, that's some of the structural stuff around your intestines and organs, but it doesn't help with joints.
Right.
But when you look at most of the stuff on the market, and you're seeing things like vital protein, collagen protein, that's not protein that goes to our daily intake of protein, because collagen does not count as our daily intake of protein because it's structural.
It's only one of the amino acids.
Right, because it's structural. And they're always type 1 and 3. So they're like, yeah, you can take this supplement and it really benefits your joints. And it accounts for your protein intake. It's like, no, it doesn't. 1, it's the wrong kind of collagen. And 2, it doesn't count for my protein intake.
So do you say don't have collagen? Or if you do, you don't have it as your protein intake?
You don't have it as your protein intake. But if you're someone who has a family history or has a diagnosis of osteoarthritis, then it can be beneficial to use type 2s. But you have to be very cognizant that you want type 2, peptide, and native.
Okay.
And it's hard to find. So you have to do your due diligence to find it.
Any good brands?
No, I can't say that because it's global, right? Every country's a little bit different.
Okay. And what about, I know it's not your area, but on the beauty side of things, because women are going to want it. I think women buy it for that reason as opposed to the bone density.
Yeah. And when you're seeing people using collagen, the type 1s and 3s, then yes, they get strong nails, they get lustrous hair, all those kinds of things. When we look at vegetarian and vegans, and they're not getting collagen, and you see this vegan collagen, walk away. Because there's no such thing as vegan collagen. There's a collagen booster, which is copper and zinc and vitamin C. You can use that. That's going to help your body's own production, but it's not going to be like ingesting collagen.
So the jury's out on collagen.
Yeah.
We think yes, but very specific on what type.
Right.
And it's not going towards your protein daily intake.
Correct.
Because it's only one of the amino acids.
Correct.
Okay. Magnesium.
Yes.
This is a big one.
Yes.
There's lots of types of magnesium.
Yes.
This is not talked about at all. So can you give your outtake on magnesium and which one should women be looking at?
Yes. So there is some data that shows that magnesium is beneficial for sleep. And this is primarily because of our muscle contractions, right? So we want to have a relaxation of everything. So if we have enough magnesium to support brain and muscle, then yes, we can get to sleep. We need one that crosses blood-brain barrier to help. And this is a biglycinate.
There's only one,
Yep.
isn't there?
Yep. So when you're looking at your magnesium supplement, you don't want to go for, oxalate, because that's a laxative. Right? So you have to be very conscious that you want to look for a biglycinate or a glycinate.
Okay. Creatine.
It's the best thing out there.
I knew you'd say that. Okay, how should people be looking at creatine, and how much should they be taking?
Yeah, so your body naturally produces around 2 grams a day. If you have a diet that is meat-oriented, then you're also ingesting a lot of creatine that way. Most women don't eat enough to actually provide as much as the body actually goes through. We see there's a change across the menstrual cycle of how your body uses and regulates creatine. So we see that there's a increase in creatine kinase, which is your breakdown in the high hormone phase, because again, progesterone is trying to provide all the building blocks. So really having the availability of more creatine helps with that too. If we're looking at supplementing with creatine, we want creatine monohydrate, and I don't get any kind of kickback from this company, but the company that produces CreaPure, this is a German B2B, meaning business to business. CreaPure is patented, and so it uses a water wash. There's no real side effects from using it. It's pure, and it's in almost every high-quality creatine monohydrate product that's out there. So if you're looking at something that has CreaPure on it, you want to start with 1 to 3 grams and work your way up to 5 grams over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks. And that's going to attenuate any possible side effect.
Okay.
If you're looking at a cheaper version of creatine monohydrate, it comes as an acid wash because it's cheaper to produce it through acid, evaporative, and other things in the lab than it is to use a water wash, which is really specific. And this is why we start to see a lot of bloating and stomach discomfort and some of the other side effects that we see.
Okay.
So again, being consumer, be aware.
Be aware.
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about creatine with DOMs.
Yeah.
Should people be having it a specific time after they exercise? When should we be consuming it?
No, because it doesn't have an acute effect. It takes about 3 weeks for the body to be saturated.
Okay.
So you need to...
That's why you're building it up.
Yes. And once it's saturated and has enough, that's when you start to see the performance effects. We see that over the course of 3 to 4 weeks of consistently using 3 to 5 grams every day, you get that full saturation. Muscle works better, brain works better, gut's better, because anything that has a fast energetic requires creatine. So we see that, the brain fog starts to be attenuated with creatine use. We start to see gut issues with women who go, I go for a run, I have to find a bathroom every time I go for a run. Using the 3 to 5 grams over the course of a month, then that starts to dissipate as well.
Wow.
Because it maintains the gut integrity of the intestinal cells. You don't have as much of that separation because now you have creatine that's going to work in those energetics to hold it together. And then also we see for mood and mood health, creatine is really beneficial for that too.
So actually most women are perimenopausal, maybe all women, but I'm just really thinking about the side effects that we were talking about, or the physical sides that we might see in oneself when we're perimenopausal. This could be an amazing supplement.
Absolutely.
Gosh, it's interesting how it's not spoken about more. It's very much spoken in the sports domain, I think, but just general health for women, it's just not spoken about.
Yeah, so Crea Vitalis and Creatine for Life.
Okay.
Creatine for Life website has all the stuff that creatine does for health. And there are a lot of my colleagues in the sports science and supplement world that also are doing research on creatine for health. And so all the peer-reviewed studies that you can find are on Creatine for Health website. Crea Vitalis is an offshoot of CreaPure that is designed specifically for health and not bodybuilding. So it's a lower dose and it's a very high quality protein or high quality creatine supplementation. So there's definitely stuff that's coming out and it's a push to get into the health space for both men and women. But yeah, it's slow coming.
Omega-3.
It's hit or miss, right? I, as a vegetarian.
Is that the first time you said that?
No.
Oh, okay,
I think
fine.
it's known. Yeah, I know. I think it's known.
Give me something.
Sorry. I use it, right? But specific that it's vegetarian source.
But do you take an algae supplement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I find it's very helpful. But for the general purposes, the information out there from scientific research, it's neither here nor there. If you're a vegetarian, vegan, then yes, there's efficacy for it. If you're not, there's not so much unless it's specific for you as an individual and you've had tests to show that you're low in it and you need it.
It's interesting, a lot of the studies that I've read on the omega-3 area, the ones that had a P positive value was actually from the people that ate the fish.
Yeah.
Not from the supplements.
Not from the supplements.
So that's why it's really nuanced, because when you look at it, when you talk about omega-3 as a supplement, all the benefits that I see is when people actually eat the oily fish.
Right.
Whereas the supplementation part is very, very vague.
Right. And this comes with most supplements. Because when you look at taking a supplement,
how is it absorbed?
Right. And what are the cofactors in food that allow things to be absorbed and used that's not in a pill?
Yeah.
So this is why we're like, be very careful with supplementation. Try to get it from food. Creatine can be an exception because in order to get 3 to 5 grams, you're looking at 20 chicken breasts a day.
Yeah, and if you're a vegetarian,
you don't get it, right?
You don't get it.
Right.
Okay, vitamin D. This is one that we have to supplement with because we can't get enough.
Correct.
From the sun. Maybe you can if you live in LA where we're recording this.
But not really, because we're in the society of wearing hats and sunscreen all the time.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is something, especially in winter. And for us coming from the very different parts of the world where the light is very changeable, it's very important to supplement.
Yeah. So vitamin D is a big one. I always say take it in the morning because it's a hormone.
Yes.
And probiotics. Because you spoke about gut health for women.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your outtake on probiotics?
I'm not a fan of taking them. Food, definitely.
Yeah.
Fermented food, best way.
And yogurt.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why I say that is because we look at the probiotics that are on the shelf, they come from maybe 2 or 3 different companies and they're all the same strain. So the same as we have this antibiotic fear, right, where antibiotics aren't working because there's an overexposure to them. We see these probiotics that are over the counter are all the same strain coming from 3 different companies. It's going to create even more problems than not having them, right? So I'm like, fermented foods for your probiotics, lots of fibery foods for your prebiotics. You're not using supplements for either one.
I'm thinking about that example has come up a lot when we've spoken about perimenopause, that women are suffering more with their sleep. And that made me lead to a question actually around women's and men's brains. Are they different? Are they the same size? Are they different cognitive abilities? Like, do women have similar brains to men or are they quite different? Because I think when we're now talking about scientific research, we're so aware of how much research is being done on men and not on women. And I'm wondering, is there a difference between women's and men's brains? And is this important, if so, for us to understand?
It's important for people to know that as far as capacity and structure is concerned, there's no difference between a man and a woman's brain. And I want to emphasize the concept of capacity because sometimes when you create a disparity or when you state a disparity between a woman and a man's brain, then people usually think that, oh, maybe in certain periods of life, women are not able to have peak performance. And that is absolutely not true. This was, a concept that was perpetuated for decades, and it ostracized women from doing phenomenal things. And we all know
it would
women
put a woman off. It would definitely put a woman off.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. They were not given promotions. They were not given opportunity to do phenomenal things. And so I wanted to kind of couch that before moving forward. As far as how a woman's brain interacts with lifestyle pillars, whether that's nutrition or sleep or cognitive optimization, there seems to be some differences. when a woman is going through an adolescent period and when they're going through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopausal stages, to the point where we now have data that women tend to react differently to cholesterol levels compared to men. The arteries in their brain have different level of vulnerability to, say, for example, high LDL cholesterol compared to men. So those cellular changes related to presence or absence of estrogen has been studied. And how does that reflect to their day-to-day lives, and how does that make them take better care of themselves? That is a wonderful topic that we can talk about. So during perimenopause and menopause, women's bodies change. So it's a period of physiological change and neurological change as well. We know that the brain has tremendous number of estrogen receptors, and these estrogen receptors are involved in memory processes, in different cognitive domains, whether it's attention and focus and movement, et cetera, et cetera. But these are not permanent changes. These are temporary changes, and women can do so much to make sure that they perform, they have peak performance mentally, cognitively, that they manage their stressors, that they manage how they process information, how they solve problems. So there's a lot that they can do. And it comes back to the importance of identifying their risk factors, what they were born with, and implement the necessary lifestyle changes to have better brain health.
Can I introduce a controversial topic here?
Please.
Okay. And I don't think you and I have spoken about this. I think that men and women's brains are very different. And this is not me giving you an emotional or political statement, and it's going to make sense. I think that as far as size, there might be a little bit of a size difference between men and women. Men have, on the average, a little bigger brains.
I saw it was 11% larger, but I don't know if that's right or wrong.
But that has never translated to function at all in any test. In fact, so that's one. The second thing is, I really think that, and this is neurologically and evolutionary very evident, the most important thing is empathy. Empathy is programmed in women for many reasons. Motherhood is one, and doesn't mean that women have to be a mother. No, not at all. It's programmed. Whereas it comes second nature, the most important thing in humanity. And I want to say that at a very critical time that we are here in human history right now. Men are making a lot of little jumps and hoopla, and they're showing their power and social media and everywhere. The most powerful element is empathy, and it's women-centered. Let's just say that. And it's neurologically right, it's evolutionarily right, and it's future-orientedly right. It's women-centered. And as far as cognitive capacity, where we usually said that women have certain capacities and not others, like mathematical, well, women are excelling in math more than men in any time in history right now. So in many ways, the cognitive capacity, if not equal, there seems to be a little bit of a focus advantage to women. Empathically, women have a little bit of an advantage. And beyond that, there isn't much more difference. As far as proclivities for diseases and risks, yes, men have certain risks for certain diseases. Women have certain risks for other diseases. And the big picture of diseases and risks, they kind of, parse themselves out. But the important concept to talk about, and this is very important that this discussion is had repeatedly and everywhere, is that empathically there seems to be a very great difference that should drive us in the right direction as humanity.
I absolutely love that you said that, Dean, because I'm a huge believer that women are amazing leaders for that exact reason, that they seem to hold a lot more empathetic qualities. And as a leadership role, that's really important.
One of my PhDs is in leadership, healthcare leadership. And all except the muscle one, where you say, let's go up the hill and capture that hill. All the other leadership capacities are feminine.
When we look at the brain, can we see where empathy is more rich in the brain compared to others if we do a brain scan? And I guess for me, that also links to compassion, because when we show empathy, we also can drive compassion for oneself, which I believe is the secret ingredient for brain health. But can we see that in the brain?
Functional MRIs give you a little bit of window into compassion. Compassion is a complex product of several elements, right? But emotional brain is in the limbic system of the brain, and you can do experiments, fMRI experiments, to kind of test that out. So that's basically what we could actually have a window into that function through those kind of experimentations.